Well, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. It's the second Friday of the month and we're back for our Public Policy Committee meeting. And as I think back, this was the last in-person meeting the Chamber was able to hold last March. And so we're back virtually, and so we're glad to have everybody here with us. For those of you that are calling in today with us, we've got Hollywood Squares open. So that means everybody's cameras can be turned on. In a few minutes when we start our presentation, we'll turn off your audio, but we'll keep the cameras going. So if you want to click up to gallery view on your screen, that way you can see everybody. And you know that our tradition is that we go around the table and introduce everyone. Instead today we'll do it virtually. So we've got the chat feature going for you to introduce yourself. And also we'll use the chat feature today to moderate the question and answer time. And I'm really excited because we are welcoming back last year's committee chair to continue his term. Dave Nitre from the Outdoor Discovery Center was our committee chair. His time got cut short by the pandemic, so we've asked him to continue into this year. So thank you, Dave, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Jane. It's good to be back with everyone. I do remember, getting the chance. That was one of those last kind of strange time periods to have that last meeting, and it's good to see all you folks again. We have some exciting things coming up, including an election, and we are in luck today that we have Justin Roebuck, our very own county clerk, who has successfully steered numerous elections for our community, and he's going to be able to share more just about that process this year, as well as give us a chance to kind of talk through some questions that we might have as well. So with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Justin, who just shared that he has seen too many cats in Zoom calls. So if you're a cat person, you can be mad at Justin.
I did not say too many cats. I just said I've seen a lot of cats.
Oh, okay, he's already backpedaling. I like it. Yeah. So thanks, Justin.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Really appreciate this group and appreciate the opportunity to kind of share a little bit about what's going on. In our world, I guess elections is really everyone's world. So, want to kind of update you a little bit. I thought what I do with this presentation is kind of go through a few data points on what's been happening in 2020, a little bit about what we expect for the November election. We've already had 3 elections in Ottawa County this year, and obviously the grand finale is coming up in less than 50 days. So we're excited about that. We've got a lot of plans going on. So I'm going to go through kind of just some stats, talk a little bit about election security in Ottawa County and in Michigan in general, and then hopefully get into whatever questions you guys may have. I'm happy to touch base on any topics. Dave did promise that he had some hard-hitting questions for me, so I am prepped for that as well. So yeah, you can go ahead and start the slide if you want. Just thought I'd talk a little bit about turnout this year. So again, this November will be our 4th election. In March was a presidential primary. We had about a 30% turnout countywide. In March, we had 207,000 registered voters countywide. It's a little over an average turnout for a presidential primary. Typically, we see anywhere from 20 to 25% turnout is fairly normal. So this was a higher turnout. What's interesting about this turnout as well is 40% of that turnout was by absentee. The other interesting fun fact was that at 10 p.m. as results were continuing to come in on election night, that was officially the first declaration of state of emergency by Governor Whitmer. So we really kicked off, at the very end of the March presidential primary, kind of began this sense of COVID operations for the county and for county elections. May's election was a smaller election. There were 2 school districts involved in that election within Ottawa County specifically, actually 3. Kennewa Hills comes into Ottawa County a little bit, but we had Grand Haven and Hudsonville schools. 27% turnout is really high for a May election. We historically have only had 1 May election that's been higher than that, and that was a 31% turnout. About 10 years ago, we had a statewide road millage in May, and that was a little bit higher turnout. And then August, we just wrapped up with a 34% turnout, and that is definitely been the highest recorded turnout of an August primary election. So one thing that I think has encouraged me is that, you know, this whole process that we've gone through this year with COVID has not discouraged voting. And that is really important. And then our general election in November, you know, we have here a 70% expected turnout. Honestly, I feel that that turnout, that 70% number is an average turnout in a presidential year. And I'm very much anticipating a higher turnout than that. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit just specifically about turnout by mail versus in person. And I know that this has been very much in focus and in the news this year, the vote by mail process. And interestingly, for Michigan, many of you know that Proposal 18.3 that passed in November of 2018 actually changed a lot of the rules and regulations regarding absentee voting in Michigan way prior to the pandemic. So basically allowed for what we call no reason AV. So you can get an absentee ballot for any reason. Anyone can request it. So that was a statewide proposal in November of 18, and that really shifted the process. And we really early on saw that. I co-chair, I'm the Republican co-chair of the County Clerk Association in Michigan, our legislative committee, and I've served in that role for a couple of years. And so we actively have been, you know, coming to the legislature kind of requesting some infrastructure changes due to vote by mail. But when you look at it, pre-pandemic, the March presidential primaries, 40% of our turnout was by absentee ballot. And that is significant. Normally, a turnout pre-Proposal 3 was anywhere from 20 to 25% absentee turnout. The May special election, again, with those 3 school districts, was very different because that election was essentially administered by executive order. So the governor issued Executive Order 2020-27, which basically governed how that election operated. There was 1 precinct in every jurisdiction open for voters who needed assistance in some way, marking their ballot, or who would like to actually cast a ballot in person. But remarkably, out of the turnout that we had in May, we had a universe, I believe, of about 70,000 registered voters, and we had 18,636 people cast a ballot. 372 of those were in person. So the vast majority of people used the vote by mail option. And then the August primary, which was a little bit back to normal from the sense of, you know, we had all of our polling locations open, which will be the case in November as well. So every polling location in the county, we have 111 polling locations, was open and ready for business. But that turnout was almost 70% by mail. So that's, again, remarkable from the sense that that's really shifted. And one of the interesting things that we've been following as far as trend lines, and this is pre-pandemic as well, is just looking at the number of people that are going to choose to do this in the future. So how much is vote by mail going to be just a part of our elections process for most voters, or more voters than previous? And, you know, when you look at the data from other states, we see that this is generally a trend that sticks. The states that have gone in the vote by mail direction, or at least opened up the absentee voting process for voters to choose that option, a lot of voters tend to vote that way. It is convenient. I think one of the things that, you know, I personally like about it is that you can research candidates. You know, you can actually become a little bit more of an informed voter. A lot of people don't realize in a presidential election when they go walk into the ballot box that there are dozens of candidates and proposals to choose from, you know. So you could sit at your kitchen table and research your ballot a little bit easier. So our expected November numbers, and I actually don't know why the team put 67 versus 68% there, but I would say that we expect 70% of our total turnout to be by mail in November. Again, we strongly advocate for both options. I really believe that voters do need to have an in-person option as well, and every one of our polling locations will be open. But that vote by mail option is certainly a secure option as well, and a lot of voters have chosen to go that route. So yeah, I mean, we're looking today, in fact, just before I jumped on the call, looked at our numbers, and currently we have 69,000 applications for absentee ballot sitting in our clerk's offices right now. So our ballots are due to be delivered to the local clerks early next week. And then probably by the following week, voters will begin receiving those ballots by mail, the ones who have already requested it. So one interesting thing about this process as well is it shifted the cycle of the election a little bit. We're going to have a lot of people voting, actually, choosing their candidates in the last week of September, first couple of weeks of October. And you can go to the next slide if you like. So some of the things I thought we'd talk about a little bit too, just the challenges of running an election during a pandemic. Pandemic has not been fun for any of us. We all have had challenges in the business world and I think in every aspect of life almost, but certainly in election administration, that has been no different. Significant changes to our polling locations, statewide in particular. Ottawa County has been fairly fortunate in that we've had only a couple of locations essentially say, we're not open for business, and we've had to kind of shift polling locations to places that are. The significant increase in absentee voting is a logistical challenge, and we really need an infrastructure in place that will allow us to securely count ballots and count them in a timely fashion. And I feel really confident with where Ottawa County is at in this process, and we can get into a little bit more of the security elements of absentee ballots as well, but it's a very time-intensive process on the front end, well before Election Day, for our local clerks. We have 23 local jurisdiction clerks here in Ottawa County, and truly, they are going through a number of security checks prior to Election Day, verifying signatures, reaching out to voters whose signatures don't match, confirming information with voters prior to Election Day. And of course, ballots are not counted prior to Election Day. They're stored securely, still sealed up in envelopes until Election Day. So that increase in absentee voting has caused some logistical challenges as well. Communication. We have a number of new voters who are entering the process. In fact, from the beginning of this year until today, we have over 15,000 new registered voters in Ottawa County, and that's a big number. Particularly, partly because we're the fastest growing county in Michigan, and so we do have people moving into the county. But Proposal 3 also changed some voter registration aspects of voter registration, where now we have automatic voter registration through any transaction with the Secretary of State's office. So we're dealing with a lot of new voters. And then there are what we call, sometimes the Easter and Christmas crowd, right? With voters who come every 4 years during a presidential election and cast a ballot. And for those voters, quite a bit of things have changed in terms of their ability to vote absentee, certainly in terms of what the precincts will look like logistically on Election Day as well, due to COVID. And so it's really important for us to get communication out, good communication out to voters. And then there's a manpower challenge. Ottawa County has over 1,000 election workers just in our county that are deployed on Election Day in polling places. Our goal is to increase that number by at least 20% for the November election. And that's due to the drop off we've seen in the August election in particular. We've seen workers, as it gets closer to the election, decide that they just are not able to commit to that work. And election workers nationwide are statistically an at-risk population when it comes to COVID. Actually, in Michigan, we have 74% of our election workers are over the age of 60. And these are some tremendous people, and people who've given a lot to the communities over the years in service as an election worker. But what we're trying to do too is to recruit a new generation of workers and make sure that we have that, backup, a just solid force of election workers to be able to be deployed on Election Day. So those are some of the particular challenges with that, but we have had some positive changes as well. Talk a little bit about that on the next slide. One of the really big changes that we've seen just here in our office has been on the training front. Now, the state requires a 2-year certification program, which always happens in the major election years of our election workers. So we went from pre-2020, we were training 100% of our workers in person. And that's training over 1,000 people during about a month-long period of time. Pretty intensive training effort, 2 to 3 hour training per session, and then some hands-on work. So we went from 100% in person to about 90% online through the 2020 cycle. And we've got some great resources for that. We've utilized some really great training technology, which allows people to log in, come back, and review videos. And so our team's really worked hard on that training effort, and it's gone really well. The other thing that we've utilized with technology is that sometimes that face-to-face in person is so important when you're dealing with training folks, particularly new people or maybe precinct chairs who kind of answer a little bit more to some of the tougher questions on election day. So we've done a lot of Zoom sessions. So we'll schedule Zoom sessions with our workers, kind of have this back and forth dialogue where we do the same thing. We do the Hollywood squares and just open up with questions, dive a little bit deeper. So training is actually, I believe, improved. Even though there's no substitute sometimes for hands-on, we really have improved the number of trainings that we've been able to hold, the access for people, and making sure that we have grown that. Communication is another thing that I think has actually been a positive for us this year. One reason is because we've gotten a whole lot of interest in the election, right? I mean, there's a whole lot of people talking about the election this year. And that has allowed us to kind of expand our social media presence, trying to, as best we can, to get good, consistent, factual information out to our voters. The other thing that has really encouraged me, honestly, are the people who've come and said, hey, I want to help. We get calls almost every day from people who are interested in helping at some level with working with the election. And that is tremendous. And that's not something that we've seen before. And so we kind of know that we're getting that message out, and that people are hearing that this is really an important thing to do in the community, and people care about our elections, which is really encouraging. On the next slide, just talking briefly, I wanted to hit some components of election security that are not new at all, but that are things that I think we want to remind our voters that the election process in Ottawa County and in Michigan is secure. There are a number of factors that go into what we do with election security, but first and foremost, our election systems are never connected to the internet. That the software and the equipment that we use to program the election is completely air-gapped from the internet. We go through quite an extensive process on election night with retrieving results, because unofficial results are sent to us by what we call it's a secure VPN modem connection from the equipment after the polls have closed. So after the equipment is turned off, we have this secure connection. So that comes into an air-gapped computer in our office. It's completely separate from all of the other computers. We have to take a flash drive that's encrypted and put it onto another computer. And it's quite the extensive process, but it's really important that that people know the ballots that are programmed and counted, there's never an internet connection there. And we have a paper ballot backup, which is critical. Very important to know that you can always go back to verify how votes were cast. The other thing that we have is the audit process after the election. Elections are never official until our Board of County Canvassers certifies them. So there's a full audit that takes place by this 4-member board, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, independently appointed. And they literally go through an audit of every precinct. They see how many ballots were cast, how many voters participated, and they check that number to make sure that matches. They check signatures, they check seals. It's a very thorough process. It takes up to 2 weeks after an election. So a lot of our friends think we're breathing a sigh of relief after Election Day. That's not quite the case always for us. We continue to certify that election days afterwards. And then we do a hand audit of results as well. So Proposal 3 also actually stipulates in the state constitution an audit after every state election. We were doing this prior to Proposal 3 as well, but we randomly select a number of precincts in the county. My staff and the local clerk staff conduct an actual hand count audit of those precincts, as well as a number of other procedural things that we're auditing, but to ensure that the count is accurate. And they have been, those audits through the past 3 years that we've done that hand count audit have been 100% accurate, which is always an encouraging statistic. Paper ballots are then securely stored after the election. So basically we've got 22 months that we're storing these paper ballots. So if there's a question within that period of time as to the result, we always have the paper backup. So another thing that we've done this year is we've developed, because of a lot of the questions and the feedback that we've gotten from voters, we've developed a website that's specifically dedicated to election security and the measures that we're taking both by mail and in person to secure the integrity of the election in Ottawa County. And you can visit us at it's miottawa.org/securingthevote. And there's a lot of good FAQs on there. So if you've got questions, if you've got friends with questions, be sure to check that out. I think it's been an encouraging tool for us to use as well. A couple of other things about how you can get involved if you're interested in getting involved in this process. I think the biggest thing, sorry, the next slide, we're talking about with our voters is prepare, plan, and participate. Make sure that you are prepared. Make sure that you have a plan to vote. So the first obvious preparation would be checking your voter registration status, making sure that if you've moved, or maybe if you're a new voter, making sure that you're registered to vote. You can do that online. Michigan.gov/vote is a great tool for checking your registration status. You can do a bunch of other stuff there as well, like track the progress of your absentee ballot application. Make sure your clerks received your ballot once it's been mailed back. And then make a plan to vote. We really encourage that if you are voting absentee, allow at least 10 days if you're mailing that ballot into the clerk. So at least 10 days prior to the election, make sure if you're using the postal system. But we also have a lot of convenient Dropbox options. So we want to make sure that people are aware of that. We're actually going to be launching a tool in the next couple of weeks on our website, which is a really simple interface, but it's basically like Find My Dropbox. You type in your address and it will zoom right into a physical description and a photo of where your Dropbox is located within your community to drop off an absentee ballot. And we've had really successful use of Dropboxes. Every one of our communities has a Dropbox, and percentage-wise, 40 to 50% of absentee ballots returned have already been coming in through the Dropbox method. So that's always good. And then make sure that you participate in whatever way. If you choose to vote in person or by mail, it matters. The other thing that we ask in terms of getting involved is to share information. I think that's the biggest thing that we can do as members of the community and leaders in our community. We have a certain level of trust within our friend groups and our social circles, and it's so important to just get consistent factual information out. There's so much going on right now, so much misinformation, so much just confusion and legitimate questions that people have, and we want to make sure we answer those questions as well. And then if you are interested, or if you know anyone who's interested in serving as an election worker, we actually launched a website that went live yesterday, and that is miottawa.org/electworker. And that's going to be a really good tool for us in the recruitment process as well. But you can find out some information on what it takes to serve, see if it's something that interests you, and fill out a brief survey application there, and it launches into our online training process. So that's kind of the gist of it. And I apologize, I think I went a little bit over, so I'm going to stop talking.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we've had lots of great questions come in, so I'll try to navigate these in groups for us. In particular, we've talked a little bit about the potential for fraud. And so starting there in terms of how significant of a risk that is. You've been involved in a lot of elections, Justin. what do you perceive as the risk there? And then there were some specific questions on some examples of what people are worried about. Maybe you could touch on, like, someone showing up to vote and doing an absentee ballot,
Right.
verifying names that come through in the mail, those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, those are all really good questions, and questions that as election administrators we owe it to answer. And so one of the biggest things that people have talked about, fraud through the absentee voting process. Absentee voting is not new. It's not new for Michigan. It's not new for most of the country. It's just an increased volume. So we do have systems in place. We have a really great statewide database. It's called the Qualified Voter File. And that's a secure database that every election official has access to for their jurisdiction. And that's where everything is run through. So the Qualified Voter File ties to the driver license file in terms of the address and signature of every voter. So first of all, to get a ballot in Michigan, you have to apply. Whether you're walking in person and you fill out that little piece of paper prior to voting, or you want an absentee ballot. So your signature, date of birth information is always verified by a real human being. Our 23 local jurisdiction clerks are charged with that. So they're verifying voter signatures, and they are calling voters whose signatures may not match that record. So that's the first verification step with the application. Once the application is sent, or once the ballot is sent, there's another verification step, the same thing. We're verifying the voter's signature when it comes back on the application. That is a 5-year felony to forge a signature on an application to vote or on a ballot. So it's potential of 2 5-year felonies if someone were to do that. So I think that's one thing. We have rigorous systems in place to check, but we also have a rigorous system to punish offenders. And I think it's important that we have those teeth in place as well. In terms of voting in person versus absentee, or trying to do both, again, that Qualified Voter File system works well for that as well, because anyone who's cast an absentee ballot, that record, it's on their voter record. So when I come into the precinct on election day and Dave is my election worker, I swipe my license, my name comes up, and in bold red letters on the bottom, it says Justin Roebuck has already received an absentee ballot. It will also say if I've returned it. So the clerk has said, okay, you've been mailed an absentee ballot. Well, what if I lost it? What if the dog ate it? What if I never got it in the mail? There are options for me to cast a ballot in the precinct at that point. In fact, I can also bring my physical ballot in that I got in the mail and say, you know what, I decide I want to vote in person. So we had a lot of people do that in August. So you can bring that physical ballot in and turn it over, or I can sign a legal document that basically says I never received it and I would like to vote in person. But that information is automatically there on that voter's profile for the election worker to see. So if the ballot's then returned to the clerk, that's it for that voter. They cannot vote in person.
Great, thank you. Another kind of question on kind of process. Penny's asked, is there a way for folks to show up and see if their ballot was counted that day?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a couple of things. Election polling places are always open to the public. They're a public venue for election day. In fact, by law, we have to have a public viewing area on election day in the polling place. So, if you're voting in person, obviously, you know that the ballot was cast in a machine by you. So it was tabulated by you. If you're voting absentee, you can again go online at michigan.gov/vote to make sure that your clerk has received your ballot. One of the challenges that we have with absentee, what we call absentee counting boards, they're basically a separate precinct of folks who count ballots, literally appointed separately than the precinct. So they're not in the precinct, but they are a separate precinct. So there's bipartisan representation there, and they are processing absentee ballots. One of the challenges we have there is you can also observe what goes on in an absentee counting board, but by law, you are sequestered until the close of polls at 8 p.m. And so that's one of the things I am actually working to change in Michigan law, because I think it's really important that we have the transparency, that the challengers appointed by parties or interest groups have the ability to go in, and they do have the ability, but I think it's a discouraging factor to folks that, you know, realize, okay, I've got to be here for 12 hours and I can't leave and I can't have my cell phone. And there are some important things in place there for security of people's votes. We don't want information getting out, but I think we also need to deal with that sequestration so that people can actually participate a little bit more in the transparency.
So kind of following up on a couple questions here, one from Adam around the law regarding counting ballots ahead of Election Day. I've served on a receiving board that gets all those absentee ballots and opens them up on Election Day in a regular non-presidential year, and you're there from 6 in the morning till 10, 11 at night finishing those ballots. What is kind of the plan to deal with that extra volume, and is there a push legislatively to give you some more just physical time to do those counting?
There is, and in an interesting bipartisan fashion, we have former Secretary of State Ruth Johnson, who's chair of the Senate Elections Committee in Michigan. She sponsored legislation, which current Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is strongly supporting, which basically would allow for what we call pre-processing. We're not counting ballots, but we would be essentially doing some of those initial security checks and processing ballots prior to the date of the election on Monday from, I think the bill calls for like 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. on that Monday. And so it is something that I support. It's something that our association supports. And it's something that I think the timeliness factor is important, but I think it does three things. It's about accuracy, it's about transparency, and it's about timeliness. You know, accuracy is really important. And when you look at how absentee ballots are counted, we see this across the state in larger jurisdictions in particular, where we've got ballots being counted all night long into the night. People who have gotten there at 7 in the morning are still working at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. the next day. And that does not bode well for accuracy. I mean, it's just simple human error is more likely to happen in those circumstances. So I really support that pre-processing for that reason. Transparency is another one. We talked about the challengers. It's a lot easier to recruit a challenger to come in at 10 a.m. on the day before the election to observe what people are doing than it is to say, hey, can you go down to the absentee counting board? It's 2:30 in the morning and they're still there. You know, how many challengers are we going to get in that situation? And then the other factor is timeliness. You know, timeliness is less important for me as an election administrator than accuracy. But the fact of the matter is, the longer we take to count, the more distrust becomes a factor, and the more people question what's happening and what's going on with the results. And I really do think it's important that we have, you know, an ability to finalize the election, or at least with unofficial results, you know, on election night or soon after. So we're supportive of that. Senator Shirkey has indicated support of taking that up in the Senate in the coming weeks. And so we're kind of hoping it's Senate Bill 757. And we're kind of hoping that will move forward.
Thanks, Justin. We did have a question about your prediction on when we should expect election results, or how do we temper our expectations, or when do you think you'll know in Ottawa County?
You know, I think this is something that we're really focused on. I really believe we're in decent shape for delivering results in a timely manner. We invested we purchased about $100,000 in additional equipment, which was matched by the state of Michigan in CARES funding prior to the August election. We've deployed all that equipment knowing that we need the additional resources. We're heavily focused on absentee counting board training this year. We've just released a couple of additional training materials for our clerks and election workers in that area. And I believe that, you know, it may be late into the night before all results are reported, but we're not going to leave here until Ottawa County is 100% reporting. So, and I don't own a cot, so that is going to be my optimistic prediction.
Well, I was just going to try to do a sales pitch on more election workers, but that's not the first thing I'd put on the list. One quick note on that side, those are paid positions, correct, Justin?
They are paid positions, yeah. The average, so they're paid each jurisdiction hires and pays, so there are some different rates of pay, but the average election worker salary is $13.50 an hour in Ottawa County. Some jurisdictions pay more, some pay a little bit less, but that's our average.
Thanks, Justin. And I noticed a note here from Jane, so we are going to keep rolling with questions for 10 minutes or so here after we wrap up. Jane, would you like to wrap up and then switch into further questions, or how would you like to handle that?
Yeah, Dave, I don't know if we've gotten to all the questions, the audience submitted questions to Justin. So maybe a couple more minutes if there's any of those to wrap up, and then we can just pretend that we're all back here in the chamber building, and we'll keep everybody turn on their cameras and have some conversation for as long as you're interested. And I want to remind everybody, we're going to send you a survey after this is over. This is one of the most interactive meetings we've tried so far, so we want your feedback because until the rules change, we're still going to be virtual. So please fill out that survey when you get it later today.
Perfect. I do see a couple more. One from Mike Hill, wondering about pre-printed voter lists that are checked against in certain precincts as opposed to a computer system. Maybe you mentioned earlier, is that a similar process or?
Yeah, so countywide and actually statewide now, Ottawa County was one of the beta counties for electronic poll books. So these poll books are not connected to the internet, but they do have all of the voter data downloaded onto them from 5 p.m. the day before the election. So all voter data is on these electronic poll books, and that is including those absentee ballot notifications as well. But we also do require a backup of a paper poll list. So the electronic poll books honestly have been a great resource for us because they're quicker, more responsive, and they're less prone to error. So, it's a lot harder for me to accidentally highlight or check off the wrong name on a poll book and actually get misinformation on the poll book. So the electronic poll book has been great, but we do have paper backups in every single jurisdiction. It's important that these devices are not connected to the internet for obvious reasons, and that's a strength of the system that we have here in Michigan as well. But we have had failures from time to time. We've had them since 2011, so we know the importance of a paper poll book and making sure that we have all the voter data in paper form as well.
And would that process be different? I think Mike's in Allegan County. I know you are not in charge over there, but do you know, is their process similar?
Yeah, I believe so. It's certainly similar with the electronic poll books, and it definitely is a best practice to do those paper backups. And I'm sure that's the case in Allegan as well.
And then Tom had a question here on the post-election audit process. I think we all remember the Florida gentleman, staring up at the hanging Chad photo. What does that audit process look like? And are there protocols for how those folks are selected and screened or those kinds of things?
Yeah. Well, thank God we have no Chads in Michigan. We have no hanging Chads. That butterfly ballot punch card system is probably not ideal. So our paper ballot system is easier for that purpose, for that kind of an audit. But yeah, so what we have, the audit is conducted under the statute. It's conducted by the county clerks under the authority of the Secretary of State. And so our team at the county clerk's office goes into the post-election audit, and typically it's at least 10% of the county is audited. So we are hand counting. I think in November of 18, just the last big general, we hand counted almost 30,000 ballots during the audit, which really takes an interesting level of preparation from our staff. And we've got teams that are kind of getting this down now a little bit on the hand count. But those are obviously open to the public as well. They're open process audits. And as a part of that, there are races that are selected by the Secretary of State. So the Secretary of State selects the precincts audited and the races that we would audit. And then we basically are charged with going in and performing those hand counts. There's also a number of procedural items that we audit the clerks on, whether or not their election workers were all certified, whether or not they posted the correct legal notices for the election. There's a number of different things. So that's a little bit different than recounts. Recounts are similar hand counting measures, but we had a fun one in 2016. We're definitely preparing for one this year as well. We have contacted a number of venues to make sure that we have some social distance space for potential recounts. but in those cases, we actually hire people that operate under the Board of County Canvassers to conduct the recount as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Justin. Well, to kind of give a highlight of some of the things coming up with the Chamber, we have our annual meeting live streamed from Engedi on Friday, September 18th from 11 to 11:45. And then in addition, Monday, September 21st, our kind of first go at a Capital Connections virtual meeting to get some of the updates from our state representatives as well.